Welcome to the Sweet Science of Fighting podcast. Today, we have Anthony Turner. Welcome, Anthony.
Thank you very much for having me on, James.
No, thank you for coming on. I've had a few of your colleagues on. I had Paul Comfort on not too long ago.
Nice.
I had Lee Brown actually on not too long ago. I believe you guys redoing the Muay Thai paper that you did. Is that correct?
Oh,
Or releasing a new one?
started trying to work on some of it, but obviously Lee had his PhD, whatever, which I was part of. So we've kind of got a step away from that during this period. So we'll see how it goes, really.
Nice, all good. And for anyone who's not familiar with Anthony, do you want to just give a brief background about yourself, and then we'll just dive into
Yeah. So I am a professor in strength and conditioning. I'm at Middlesex University, which is in London, with the London Sport Institute. I look after the postgraduate research degrees, and so that's my current. That's the role. Been at the uni for quite a long time now, actually. And I think that obviously I would say I'm an academic and I'm a researcher for sure, but I've always I've always coached and I've always been involved in practice in that since the beginning. For as long as I've been teaching, I've also been coaching, and I think that's been such an important part, and certainly something I value. In that, it stops me being overly ironic, in what I teach and what I talk about. At least I can, and the things I might do in the lab, they they don't always carry over so much into practice because you've got different constraints, different environments, and everyone's so different. So it's always given me a sense of realism to the bits of work I do. So yeah, and so at the moment I work with the Spurs Women's Academy. I work there, and a few other athletes along the way. So yeah, that's me.
Nice. Is your background mainly, you mentioned MLS for the podcast, is your background mainly in soccer, is it?
No, actually, it's quite varied. I'd say it is ever so slightly, but then I've ended up working in various different sports along the way. But probably more along the lines of in football. But I've worked a lot with the army, so I've got a good insight in there, and similarly, and done some stuff in fencing as well, and then other sports along the way. But yeah,
Nice.
maybe football just pips it.
Perfect. You had an old Muay Thai strength conditioning paper, correct?
Yeah,
13, I think it was, and
yeah,
I believe, I believe that thing is the only paper published about Muay Thai because
nice.
there's not much done in that sport. So it's an interesting one there. It would be interesting, kind of just maybe go through some of the, I don't know if you can remember back that far, but even just some of the general findings and I guess your general philosophy. I think it'd be easier to go general philosophy around strength and conditioning. It doesn't just have to be for fighters because I mean
Yeah,
it kind of transcends sports. Kind of your general philosophy around strength and conditioning, and we can just dive deeper as we go through that.
yeah, absolutely. I guess my philosophy. So, obviously, I work again. I've worked in lots of different teams and lots of different clubs and what have you. And when I go in now, I think, and sometimes people aren't into it, right? They don't see it as a particularly, they might not believe it as a valuable part of training. But actually, my philosophy is all about the S and C being something that supports your longevity within the sport. It supports your robustness and your resilience to injury, which keeps you, in fighting sense, where it keeps you on the mats or it keeps you on the field. And I think that's the main. That to me is the selling point of S&C, which can be a bit of a surprise for some people. But then you've also got to realize that the things that make you more robust and resilient and increase your longevity and life after sport are the same things that improve performance anyway. It's like two for one. But it's far more powerful for me to tell you that, look, let's get you strong and you'll be training far more often. You'll always be available for selection. You'll turn up, you'll recover quicker. When you look at some papers, and various papers try to say, what's the key? Let's run all these different correlations between fitness and different performance metrics and winning a sport, and it's impossible, really. In fact, probably the only things that are ever found to have any relationship between winning teams is the squad you have to choose from. So it comes back to availability, and there's some, I really like there's some work, some research by Dr. Rich Blagrove, and he done it in running, for example. Do you do an S&C program? Yes, we do, and you see more doing it. And why do you do it? And the number one reason by quite some distance was injury prevention. So I think that my philosophy plays into the beliefs, but I believe that as well. I think that the stronger you are, the more, more robust you are, especially around the joints, the more muscle symmetry you have, and so on. So, but I think you get stronger anyway. So that would that would be part of it. Um, but no, there's certainly going to be no. If you're stronger and more powerful, I think you have more tools to support your technical and tactical advantages that you might have as well.
I love that. I've got my daughter just running here
Is that
again.
is you the host?
Mid
You the
podcast
real host here. That is,
co-host.
and that's it. This is what people are tuning in for. This is it.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, perfect. Yeah, I really like that. And yeah, as you mentioned, the things you're doing to help reduce the risk of injury end up being performance enhancing anyway, and you're more available. You can train more consistently. I mean, there's a whole host of things that
Hmm.
happen from that. So it's interesting to dive down into. Specifically, we can dive down into Muay Thai just because of that paper you wrote, and a lot of different things on. I was going to say referencing the old paper out about the contribution from the legs for punching, I guess, power, quote unquote. You got strength shortening cycle stuff you had in there and whatnot. So it'd be interesting to kind of go in. Actually, I might even go. There's actually a listener question here on the chat. I'll throw to you. We can go from there. Is
Absolutely.
what do you think is the most underrated elements or methods for increasing punching, elbow, and or kicking strike power if you think it's significantly trainable?
Yeah, of course. I think it's trainable. Look, it's certainly trainable. Nothing is more important than the technical side of it. I'd just say as well, I did Thai boxing as well for a long time, and I trained out in Thailand and things like that. And so I got this idea around the technical side of it. And look, nothing's ever going to compare to being technically and tactically sound, in terms of making the right decisions. But again, I guess if you imagine putting two similar fighters against each other, right? Imagine identical fighters, but you made one really strong, all right? Identical, except for one was super strong, and you had to say, right, who are you going to put your money on, to win the fight? And the only thing that you knew was one was way stronger than the other. Then you're going to go, all right, I'd probably back the stronger one. And part of the reason for that is, as you get stronger, you quite simply apply more force. All right, that's the long and short of it. And if you train to get strong, you do your squats or whatever it is you do, and then you train to move fast. So you do your power exercises, then you're training your capacity to produce force quickly. Now that's what Thai boxing, that's what striking is about. Striking happens in less than 50 milliseconds, in some 100 milliseconds, 150 milliseconds. So it's not just about how much force you can produce, it's how quickly you can produce that force in. And so what the part of the S&C programming will do is almost supercharges the nervous system. So it isn't necessarily making the muscles, increasing the cross-sectional area, because we don't really want that if you're going to climb another division anyway. We just want to supercharge, we want to amp up the nervous system. And so you deliver more force within a really short period of time. And that's what any training will do, any power-based training. But you want to get strong and then you want to get powerful, and you train that capacity. I guess if you imagine then for us to produce our maximum force in whatever exercise it might be, we ramp up the force, and it might take 600 milliseconds to get to our peak, to get to the force output that our nervous system and the coordination of our muscular system can produce. In Thai boxing, you've got 200 milliseconds. So the peak force is up there and you can only produce this much. So what training is about is increasing that amount that you can produce within 200 milliseconds. And the way you do that is increase your maximum force, and then you increase the rate at which you can develop that force. So strength training, power training is fundamental from that point of view.
If you're anything like me, you're short on time. Kids, family, work, training, and having to cook meals on top of that, it's just not going to happen. So I'm happy to announce Trifecta Nutrition are sponsoring the podcast. You get epic meals like these ones: turkey taco bowl, Texas barbecue protein plate. These are a couple of my favorites. but it means you don't have to prepare all your own meals, and it makes getting and good nutrition relatively easy. I've tried other meal delivery companies. Most of them are too high fat, not enough carbohydrates, or if you're getting kits where you have to cook it yourself, the portions for two is actually for one, especially if you are like me and you're training often. So if you want to take something off your plate and have meals like this delivered to your door, go down the description. There's a link there where you can order trifecta meals. This is the performance line, which are higher protein and higher carbohydrate. And you can use code LIFTBIG40. You'll get 40% off your first order. I think the best paper that illustrates that is Newton and Kramer's one in 2001. I can't remember what it's called, but they have that exact graph, and they're showing like, I guess, strength trained, power trained, and then untrained, and they show that exact thing, right? The
Exactly.
power trained has that really nice sharp uptick in that rate of force development. Strength trained, yeah, they have high maximum force at 500 milliseconds, but they take longer to get there. So that's just a really simple illustration for, I guess, for anyone who's maybe listening and wants to dive in there. But I want to take that even further and get your take on specificity then, because you talked about, okay, we can improve general force, or we can improve force capabilities through maybe whatever exercises we're doing. How much does maybe theoretical transfer to the exercises matter to you when you're looking at maybe exercise selection or what you're doing in the gym?
Honestly, not much. Not much at all. The goal when you're in the gym is to be able to produce force, and you're trying to work through relevant muscles. You know, if you look at when you punch or whatever, you've got this sort of triple extension, right? This ground up where you produce the force ground up, you extend at the knee and at the hip, and then you rotate through. But that's just about every single sport has that movement. That weight transfer, let's say when you strike and you go forward, or in baseball, got whatever it is, you step forward and you have that stiff landing, and then you transfer the force all the way up through the torso, and then you release through. So all these sports look the same. All right, and that's what we're after. So as long as you're putting a lot of force through your lower body, and then you're trying to move fast, then the rest of it is you then apply that when you in your practice. And actually, there's probably an argument to say you shouldn't be too specific, because if there's too much specificity, maybe there's too much crosstalk where it's like, oh, is this how I actually move now? But where they're so independent, you're just saying, I'm just getting strong, and then when I go and train in the ring, that's when I'm going to improve my transfer from one to the other. So I would say I wouldn't chase it. Equally, training should be about this lifelong journey that you take. You know, remember, this isn't just about so you can punch someone hard. If I go back to my philosophy, or kick someone hard, if I go back to my philosophy, it's so you can carry on doing this for as long as you want, and you want life after the sport as well. So you're going to be doing this, so you're going to be squatting forever, until the day that you drop. You're going to be lifting until the day that you drop. So it's not like I can go, let's say I said it's a back squat, as an example. Does that mean you're never going to back squat now for the rest of your life until the day you drop because you want a really strong kick? Of course. So you work your way through, because they all do the same thing in an ever so slightly different way. Some loads
Mhm.
the back a little bit more, some loads the knees a little bit more, and some loads the hips a bit more. So keep rotating through it. And then all of that detail can be saved for some of the academic stuff that we do in the lab, which is just academic knowledge half the time. So just work through it. And I have my own little system that I work through as well. And I have an order that I travel around the squats. And do you know, once you complete the order, do you know what you do? You start again. And then when do you stop? The day you the day you stop. Because it's a lifelong journey, right? And it just so happens it will make you punch harder and kick harder as well, and what have you. So I don't see that there needs to be any specificity whatsoever. In fact, maybe it's not the time. Another reason why we don't need to be over specific is because you go closer to overtraining. Lots of people that are into martial arts train a lot. I mean, and so sometimes if we want to keep training, want to train a lot, we have to do different things, right? And so even if you're trying to do conditioning, for example, not that I mean, if you're doing conditioning in Thai, but I don't think there is a better form of conditioning than the actual than combat sports, basically. But I would say do your conditioning on a bike or something like that, for example. So because it's different muscles that you're using, but again, the same stimulus.
No, you're good. Are you able to share that little squat cycle progression that you got going on there with the different exercises that you run through?
I can. Let me try and do it off the top of my head, but I'll give you a reference to it. So I do write about the stuff anyway. So I like to go through this progression. So if you're not trained before, and what I would say is people can make mistakes when they train, and people talk about can you get injured, this, that, the other. Absolutely you can, but that's because you either go too fast. So if you start training with me, I'm thinking we're going to make you great, but we're going to make you great progressively and gradually. Now this is a journey. This is not. Let's not come and work in the gym to think that in 3 months' time we're going to be double body weight back squatting. Right? That's the wrong attitude, and that's the attitude you're going to get injured with. Equally, think how strong your legs are relative to your lower back, your core, and all those. So when people max out on the legs, but the lower back's like, I ain't got this. I can't lift this much weight because we've gone head first. So the progression that you do has to give a chance for everything to catch up. So when you decide to lift heavy with your legs, your trunk's going, yeah, cool, let's do this because you've trained me to the point where I can keep up with your legs. But most injuries will happen because we'll just focus on the legs and forget everything else. The trunk's got to move with it. So if you leave that behind, you're going to feel something at some point. So it's got to be progressive. Anyway, I digress. I like I would go from a goblet squat, because it's going to help you to sit back as well. So it can help you, encourage you to have an upright torso, be proud when you squat. From that position there, then we can start to look at split squats. And with the split squats, when you're going down, you're driving through your heel. Again, you're staying upright. You're being proud. When you do it, you're really driving the weight through to your hips. Then you've got box squats, you're sitting back to a box. Again, you see everything initially for me is about teaching you to sit back and getting your weight back and using your hips more and staying more upright. Because in today's society, people fall forwards. Everything's anteriorly dominant. Everything that you can see in the mirror is the stuff that gets most of the stimulus for the most part. So this part's about moving back. And then from there, you can go on to trap bar deadlift. You go on to deadlift, and you can go back around the cycle where you had goblet squats. You can now go to front squats, and so on. Really, so we just have this. So for me, what's important is that you have the mobility to do it. You have the capacity to sit back and almost shift your center of mass from everything being in front of you to in the center of you, so you can sit back and not feel like you're going to fall forwards. And then once we've done that, now we can load you. Right now, get your deadlift out and start going for it. So I'd have that sort of circle going, and we're on that journey forever now. And you might spend less time on certain parts of it, or you might not bother with the goblet squats ever again because you can only hold 40 kilos or whatever that it goes up to. So you're like, forget that now. Let's go to front squats and so on. Already.
How long are you typically spending on each exercise then? If maybe someone's further more advanced or someone who's just a beginner?
It's very much so about how much they can say. We do the goblet squat, so I like doing blocks of 5 weeks, sometimes 6 weeks. It just depends. Really, that's a personal preference. I'm not suggesting that's that's the best way, but I might do 5 and then just keep changing every 5. But at the same time, I might extend to 6 or even 7 if the person's not getting it. But for the most part, people can do those movements. So I'll probably just stick on a 5 week cycle or even a 6 week cycle and just keep changing. It's enough to get good at it, but not so long as to get bored at it and then move on. But I don't think it matters that much. Again, that's the devil's in the detail there. As long as the person's feels, if the numbers are going up, then you're doing it. Then you're doing a good job. As long as the form is following it and everything else is. But that can be sometimes where people get caught out. Is the numbers are going up, but not evenly. Again, the lower body's getting a great job, but the upper body's not quite keeping up in there. And so we just need to stay on top of it, really.
Oh, I like that. So I guess there's a simple rubric just for even for anyone listening who's maybe newer to strength training or just trying to figure out a way that they can continually, I guess, progress but have some variations. As you mentioned, you do the
Mm.
same thing all the time, over and over. Yeah, you can run into overuse issues as one
Yeah,
of them.
yeah, exactly that.
Yeah, I mean, even just changing like grip widths, like for example, doing pull ups, doing chin up variations, pull up variations, rings, fuck anything other than just doing the same grip, same stuff all the time.
I agree. I mean, look, there's a decent argument for every session you go to, just change. Become more well-rounded. Everything gets a good workout. But for the most part, as long as everything's in balance, as long as you do a bit of squats, you look after your hamstrings, there's a bit of rotation in there, and you do some upper body front and back. I don't think you can go too wrong. Really, I really don't. And again, I've put a link through to some stuff I've done in and around that area that explains that philosophy
Mm.
as
Oh, that'll
well.
be perfect.
And even most people can't move. I would say that when you start working with people, they're not always the greatest movers. They don't always have the greatest mobility. So the first thing you've got to do really is start to address that so that they don't start to take any shortcuts. Again, if we go into the approach of right, I'm starting today, not because I think I'm going to be good in 3 months' time, but because I'm going to do this forevermore. Now with that mindset, you're like, all right, let's take my time. In 2 years, I'm still going to be doing this. In 3 years, in 10 years, but people start like 100 miles an hour, they get injured, they stop, they take some time out, and they come back into it, and they get injured, and they come back. There's a terrible cycle that they get caught into it because they want a quick fix. And I don't know that there's anything that turns out well when you take a quick fix approach or you try to cut corners. And they're trying to build a house without laying a foundation. At some point, that thing will come down, and that foundation is very much about the mobility, muscle symmetry, the capacity to move well, and everything moving together in harmony.
That's it. And I mean, you've published a lot of papers, I guess, as a supervisor and as a first author as well. Uh, I'll just set you just looking through some of the Google Scholar stuff as well now because you've got for anyone who's listening and wants to see Anthony's paper, you can just search Anthony Turner on Google Scholar and you'll get a shit ton of them. But one of the more interesting ones as well, at least for me, is around interlimb asymmetries. And that seems actually one of your more popular ones as well. It'll be interesting to kind of go into that area because there's kind of two schools of thought around asymmetries. Whereas one is like, okay, asymmetries are part of sport. Everyone has these asymmetries. I'm not going to worry about them too much if they're not causing any pain or any, I guess, real dysfunction. There's the school of thought of, hey, we have maybe some arbitrary thresholds between limbs, maybe 10% difference, and we want to try and keep them as close as possible. It'd be interesting to kind of hear your take on where you sit on the idea of correcting or not correcting interlimb asymmetries. When should you or shouldn't you? And just your general thoughts around that.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, no, look, we've done loads on this, and me and my colleague Chris Bishop, who was my PhD student before as well, who's really led the show on this. Um, you're right. So everyone will have asymmetries, and okay. So here's maybe a take on it. And so people go, look, what's the difference? Is it 10%, 20%, and so on? I could put an argument to you that there's, you know, there could be someone with a 3 or 4 or 5% difference who's far more likely to get injured than someone with a 20, 30% difference, right? Because it's can be very complicated. But if I try to give that in a sense, is that it depends on what you're doing. Your body is built for what you do on average, right? So for as long as you're always doing what you've always done, you're gonna be fine, right? Because your body is adapted to that. It's when you try to do something that you've not done in a while, and then you're asking your body to keep up with it, and it will do for the first while, but soon it might go. So for me, one of the biggest things is, all right, you might have someone might have a 20% difference, but are they strong? How strong are they to be able to tolerate the loads and what they're trying to put the body through? Someone might have a 3% difference, but they're weak as anything. So as an example, let's say you've got a 20% difference between the limbs. Now, right, let's get rid of the asymmetry. The asymmetry is the problem. I could get the strong limb and detrain it. So it gets weaker and weaker.
Mm.
Now there's a 0% asymmetry. So now do you think you're more likely or less likely to get injured, right?
Yep.
You're way more likely now because you're weak. So the problem isn't really necessarily the asymmetry, because it's just a ratio between the numbers. Actually, it's how strong are you. So the weaker limb might be more likely to be injured because it's weak relative to the other, but it actually might be strong enough, absolutely strong enough to do the
Mm.
task that you've asked it to do. Now, that said, having muscle symmetry makes sense, right? It makes sense to have it. So providing you do enough variety in the gym. So the gym is where we clean up everything. All right. It's such a great place for that because you can focus on different elements. So don't just squat, do single leg squats, do single leg jumps, do single leg hurdle jumps. And the thing is that, when new people go to the gym and everything they touch, they just get better. They have this awesome
Mhm.
learning curve. Well, that's your weaker leg relative to your stronger leg. So your stronger leg is getting better, but not the same rate that your weaker leg is getting better at. So it will catch up a bit quicker. There'll always be an imbalance, but it's strong enough to handle whatever you throw at it anyway. So I think that's an answer for me. Just be strong enough to do what you want it to do. The asymmetry isn't necessarily the problem because again, we can make you weak, and with zero, it's being weak that's the problem. So get the weak leg strong enough to do whatever you want it to do, or the arm, or whatever side it is. The other way of thinking of it is because that's between limb, right? That's a between limb. Within limb asymmetry might be the quads and the hamstrings. That might be a different argument if you go from sprints. You might have super strong quads, and you see this all the time. People don't train hamstrings, which is that's an invitation, right? And that's on them. That's on them. They go, well, I do deadlift. That's a hamstring. It's not a hamstring exercise. It barely, it does work it in as much, but if you want to train hamstring, train the hamstrings. So when you've got a within limb asymmetry like that, now that you should start to look at addressing again, because it's saying one side is weak and it probably can't tolerate. So that person that goes out for a sprint all of a sudden, so which might be atypical. Now they could be in a bit of trouble because the quad will fly the leg forward and extend the leg, and the hamstring's job will be to try to arrest that and stop it and go because it can't hold on to it. Same might be in the upper body. If you think about everything you do, especially when you're fighting, you're taking a guard, you're rounded, everything's getting shorter here, loads more work here, much stronger here. The muscles on the back at some point are just like, listen, we need to start working. But you go to the gym, right? And everything should be a 1-for-1 ratio. If you do the front, you've got to do the back. If you do the quads, you've got to do the hamstrings. So most of the programs I put together would look like that. It's if there's a if there's a quad exercise in my plan, there's a hamstring exercise. If there's a chest exercise, there's a back exercise, and so on. The problem is we only train what we see in the mirror and say that's what it's the weakness. So I'd put a lot of things down to a weakness issue. Be strong enough, which is another way of saying being robust enough to handle it. And if you
Mm.
if you go into something weak, you've got less in the tank. So that's even a conditioning and a fitness element attached to that as well, because everything taxes you a lot more than it should.
How much does maybe what you measure play into that? Because we can say, okay, interlimb asymmetry, maybe one leg is stronger than the other, maybe by peak force or whatever, but obviously, there could be underlying things, eccentric rate of force development, eccentric strength, even just general concentric rate of force development as well, maybe asymmetries. Do any of those change that at all? Or is it just, as you mentioned, you're kind of just adapted to whatever you're doing anyway, so it's not going to matter?
Yeah, I think again, probably the devil's in the detail there. I'm sure that stuff does change, and it would be hard to suggest exactly how it does change. But again, if you have a well-rounded enough program, you're gonna improve the concentric or propulsive phase, the braking phase of different jumps. It's going to change how your center of mass drops during the different movements. But all of these things might be affected by how tired you are as well, and how you reorientate yourself to get the same output. So I don't think that there'd be necessarily, your asymmetry is in this, is in the eccentric part, but not in the concentric part. Weakness is weakness, and how it decides to show itself will just depend on the strategy that you take at the time, which might be based on several other factors. But I don't know that you could pin it down to one thing. But again, a well-rounded training program, train to move, lift some heavy weight, move fast sometimes, do some unilateral work, train what do some concentric or eccentric work, some snap downs, plyos. It just needs to be a holistic program. You want to train athleticism. That's the goal is athleticism. And if you train for that, you'll take care of most parts, for sure.
Yeah, I like the holistic approach to that. I actually have a question in the chat here for you as well. Is what types of differences do you suggest, for example, Thai boxing versus boxing, for example, what you what you do with one that you don't do with the other? I frequently see combat sports done one size fits all. When and how should you adjust to the specific discipline?
You mean so in the gym, what would you do for Thai boxing that you wouldn't do for boxing?
Yeah. Oh, we can go gym or we can go conditioning. Well, both of them even.
Yeah, okay, so here's my whole thing, all right, and I'll go even more abstract than that, and then we'll come back to these two, right? So
Perfect.
if I gave you a training program that I wrote for a judo athlete, a footballer, a rugby player, a baseball player, I'm not convinced you could tell me whose is who, right? Because they all require the same qualities, which is to produce force and produce force quickly, normally from the ground up. All right. Now, there might be some elements of some of the movements where there's more of it, right? So there might be great conditioning in some of the sports compared to the others. There might be not as much in baseball or something like that. Right, so everyone probably does the same thing. It's the piece of the pie, the size of the slice that often differs between them. So if I took boxing and Thai boxing now, which are very similar, then that's almost going to be your answer. I don't think that there is that much difference between the two, because you must say, well, one kicks and the other one doesn't. So, all right, so you need to get strong legs, right, for Thai boxing, but you don't kick in box. But you still punch. And where's the force from the punch come from? And that still comes from the legs. So you've still got to do your ground up work to get strong to produce that force, to ultimately deliver the punch. The more that you step into it, the more you can load through the legs and the ground up, the better that punch is going to be. Well, the leg, obviously we train the legs to do that for the punch. It's the same exercise as we do for the kicks. So I don't know that there's that much difference between the two. Then we come up to conditioning. Um, Again, I would do similar. So for the condition that I would do in this way, I would make it dissimilar to the event, because I want you to be able to train regular. I want you to be able to train often. So I'd put both of them on a bike, both on a rower, both on battle ropes, for example, because I want to chase down a stimulus. All right. It's the stimulus I want that will generate an adaptation that you will transfer when you do your own training. So when it comes to conditioning, for example, we'll do some 30-second sprints, and then we might have 30 seconds off or 4 minutes off. It depends what enzymes we're trying to chase down and what energy systems we want. We might do the same on the rower or the ski erg and things like that. I'll get you to fix your legs because I just want to focus in on the arms. I'll get you to fix your legs, and we'll just do the battle ropes. Really, I think it's all the same. I think that again, I've probably said it a couple of times now. I don't know why. I hardly ever use this phrase, but the devil is in the detail here. It's actually very. It's really simple, and um, I think it's just that holistic program. And if you can do the conditioning, then I would do some of the sprint interval based training and high intensity interval training. There's the different energy systems that you want to focus in on. You're targeting certain things. You're either trying to target how quickly you break down glucose to get into the cell to be explosive, right? The way that the body does that, the body has no idea whether you're boxing, whether you're playing rugby or football. It doesn't know. It doesn't care. It just says, you know, train me and I'll break this thing down quick. So we'll do some 30 seconds on and we'll take 4 minutes off. And then another time it says, look, we get flooded with lactate. All right. And more specifically, the hydrogen ions that come with it. And as soon as that comes, we start to cramp up and we can't do anything. And say, all right, fine. So what's the stimulus then to help us break down or to use that, convert that lactate so that we doesn't build up and the hydrogen ions come? All right, so let's do 30 seconds on with 30 seconds rest. Let's build it up and let's train different enzymes to step in and take over from there. So again, it's the stimulant. That's what I want. I don't care how you achieve it. Now, I could just get you to do different boxing bits or different Thai boxing bits, but then it starts to interfere with what you're doing in the ring with the coach when you want to start working on your craft. So let's go to the gym. Let's get on there. It'll take you 3 minutes, 5 minutes, and I could give you a stimulus you couldn't even imagine. And you'll be ready to go again because it's a different. You're taxing different muscles, but you're getting the stimulus that you want, right?
I love that. And Joshua asked that question. He says, he's asking if you're one of the authors, editors of Advanced Strength and Conditioning, which you are. So he says, that's absolutely one of my favorite books. He's referred to it a lot, working on his masters. And if so, great work. So there's your kudos on the podcast
Oh,
then. You have a
I
fan.
appreciate that. I appreciate that. Thanks ever so much. It's always nice when you get that feedback, and I don't get tired of it because look, I've not got it's dark outside, but I'm not going to pan out and show you a Porsche got parked on the drive because I've written that. But I wish that was the case, and it won't ever be the case. But why do I do it? Because actually, there's nothing more rewarding than someone saying, "I read your work and I really enjoy it," and actually, and the opportunities from that. So I'm very grateful to hear that. So thank you very much.
Well, if you want to get the Porsche, you got to start writing books on like functional pattern stuff and hyper,
This is
the
it.
real key to athletic success
This is
is
it, and
actually
this is the
throwing the
problem.
kettlebell.
Most people say this to me, and the problem is I keep saying, actually, it's not that hard. It's just do the basics well and be holistic. But that doesn't sell. That doesn't really make me a lot of money, unfortunately. It means that the uni are happy to keep me employed with them because I remain objective and don't, come up with pseudoscience. But yeah, I do need to do that at some point.
Sell yourself out, get the
I need to
Porsche, and
sell
then
my
you're good.
soul. I need to sell my soul and say the answer to that question should have been absolutely. They're totally different. There's a system that I've written that you need to do for this. Hold on a system for this,
It's
and
just one thing.
yeah, but it's not that at all, unfortunately.
You talked a little bit about conditioning. We've talked a lot on this podcast on sprint interval training. Some of the new research around that is really interesting. I'll be interested to hear your take on, I guess new-ish ramming down our throats of zone 2 training, I guess coming more from the longevity health, I guess, podcasts and health influences there. It's obviously made its way more into sport now, where it's kind of gone that way too. So it's interesting to hear. Obviously, you talked about training for the adaptation or training for the stimulus that you want. Does zone 2 fit into maybe your model there of training for a Muay Thai athlete or boxer or anything like that?
So zone two, long steady state type work. Um, I think it's another option, and I think that some people love running and love going out and the well-being side of it and what have you. I think it's fantastic. I think maybe do I think you have to do it? I'm not convinced, but why not? I think you can chase down those adaptations that you're after there in other ways. So even if you come back to sprint interval and high intensity interval training, and I've kind of written a chapter on that with Professor David Bishop, who's brilliant. We can cheat the system a little bit here, and because you might do that to. I mean, part of it's to do is for lactate in to bring that um into the mitochondria. You want to try and convert that into a fuel source. Part of it is to get more mitochondria as well, is why you might do that. But the sprint interval net high intensity interval training, I think, can do that. So, maybe the more controversial thing that I think of is, do they need to run so much? I'm not convinced that the answer to that question is yes. I think that everyone does it and then everyone has always done it. There's a maintaining weight thing attached to it as well. But do I think that if someone stopped doing it, and there was no issue regarding weight and what have you, and they did other methods, do I think there'd be a disadvantage? No, not really. But it's a tough sell that, right? Something so
Mhm,
traditional and historic around it. I don't think it's necessarily doing any harm, but if you come back to the beginning when we talked about, your rate of force development, we talked about how much force, your maximum
mhm,
force, how much of that you can access in a short period of time as your rate of force development. The the way to flatten that out to make it worse would be to do more long distance running because
mhm.
you have competing demands. Do you want to produce a lot of force and quickly, or or do you want to produce less force but over a prolonged period of time, is what you're asking yourself. So, imagine, if you're watching, into football or something like that, it's like getting your striker who needs to be fast and powerful, converting him into a centre midfield so they can just cover more, more distance, but they're not as fast, they're not as powerful. So there's a trade-off there. But I don't know that there's, from a health perspective, a well-being perspective, of course, I think is super valuable. From a performance perspective, in a combat sport, in martial arts, is it that necessary beyond the health, well-being, and maybe weight? Not so much. No.
I tend to agree with you there as well. And we actually have another man. Chat's on fire today. You're obviously a popular guest, Anthony. So Jonathan Drummond says he's enjoying the convo, and he's asking, how would you focus on building explosiveness or acceleration? So force equals mass times acceleration through range of motion. What place do you see for plyometrics, going back to the work of Verkhoshansky, for example, or use of bands and chains, etc.?
Okay. So how do you work on acceleration, right? So,
Yeah,
well,
basically, how do you build explosiveness or acceleration through range of motion?
through range of motion. I'm not sure.
Yeah, maybe clarify that one, Jonathan. But I'm assuming just like, for example, like a full range back squat or something.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. I mean, you got to train through the range of motion to get good at it. Otherwise, if you only ever train to, quarter squats, then you're strong in that range, but you might not be so strong as you move lower down. So you've got to train in the range that you want to be strong in. Would probably be my answer for that. In terms of improving acceleration, and I think, we said force is mass times acceleration. So acceleration, therefore, is force divided by mass, right? So how do you increase acceleration? Well, you've got two options: you increase force, or you reduce mass. So get strong would be the answer to that one. And if you're carrying any excess weight, then you can drop the mass there. If you come outside of sport, for Thai boxing and whatever, it's just your body weight, so you just get leaner and so on. Because then there's less of you to move, therefore your acceleration is going to go up, really. But if you look in other sports, then obviously if that's why people spend all that money on bikes. The way of getting the mass down is to ride a lighter bike, right? So your acceleration
Mhm.
can go up, not because you're pedaling faster, because you've got a lighter bike. Although
But
ironically, then
then they've got guts hanging out of their lycra.
exactly, it's so funny. Like 10 grand on that, but then their guts hanging out the other side, and they stop for a coffee and a cake after fruit. You get the point. In the running now, people wear lighter shoes, so that's one way to cheat the system, is to chase it down through mass. But the other one, of course, is to get strong. But what I would say is that in terms of increasing acceleration, okay, you can get strong through the squats, but you still need to train the power exercises. You still need to train to ramp up the nervous system to fire quickly. So you want to do the power exercises, and you want to do some body weight jumps and some loaded jumps, really. Even if you jumped your body weight and then you held a bar and you just jumped whilst holding a bar, and then you put a bit more weight and then jumped again, or did trap bar jumps and things like that, just in different with different loads, would be fantastic. So that would be how you improve acceleration. And if you want through the range of motion, I guess my interpretation of the question, at least, is just train in the range of motion that you want to ensure that you have the improvement in.
What's your take on the use of bands and chains
Right,
for that
bands and chains.
purpose?
Yeah, great. Why not? Why not? Because obviously, otherwise, the only thing that ever gets trained is the sticking point, right? What determines the load is the sticking point. And you could almost argue that up to the sticking point and either side of the sticking point is easy. So the idea behind chains and bands is that everything's a sticking point now. So the opportunity to train through the full range of motion in that respect, maybe that's where the question is going.
Mm.
So yeah, very good question. Is very effective. I think it makes a lot of sense. I think that my other take on it, so acknowledging I think they're excellent, is I don't want to make going to the gym too onerous. Like, I don't want to put too many obstacles in the way. Like, if I've got to go to the gym and right now I've got to put a band on, and I've got to put a chain on the other side, and then I've got to do this and I've got to do that. Just go and lift the weights, and sometimes lift heavy and sometimes lift fast, and it doesn't need to be complicated any more than that. It's I think you're you'll clear up most things. There was a plyometrics bit in that as well, actually, and
That was just part of that same thing. What place do you see for plyometrics going back to the work of Verkhoshansky, for example, or use of bands and chains,
I
etc.?
see plyometrics as pivotal. Remember, I said to you, I don't think anyone does hamstrings. I don't think people do plyometrics, and I think they miss out on just some real, real magic that happens with plyometric training. The capacity, again, to produce force quickly, to use the stretch shortening cycle and the elastic energy. That's free energy, man. That stuff's stored in your tendons, and you recoil when you let that thing go. And it's unbelievable. So to not be training plyometrics would be a crime against your performance, I would say. But again, you've got to build it up progressively, right? And again, so how I work with my own philosophy and my own training is everything works in a different loop, and I think that there are certain things that train certain I think it's best if it's trained in a certain order, a certain organization of that. Actually, I have a YouTube channel, and on there's a progression of drills and plyometrics and things like that as well for people to look at. But I've also, I'll try and plug some of my own stuff towards the end.
Hmm.
I don't know if that's okay.
Yeah.
I always feel
So,
bad doing that, but
no,
people
no, you
are
have
not.
to, because I'm going to put in the description anyway for everyone
Yeah, yeah,
to check out. So,
I appreciate that. Like I said, this is I'm you rest assured it's not like it's gonna put another car on the track. It's purely because so that someone can see it and one day go, oh, I like that. Well, thank you.
with the plyometric progression, then, without having seen the video, how are you liking to progress? Are you progressing from a maybe more higher volume, extensive plyometrics into more intensive, or are you just doing straight the intensive plyometrics but lower voluming and you're making them more intense as they go through?
I mean, the key initially is always less volume because you kind of got to get used to it, and the volume can increase. And of course, that sort of trade off as the intensity goes up, you need a little bit less volume at that point. So I just like working starting from the ankle, really. I mean, that's where the power is, but people don't use it. People jump, do the drop jumps, and they do the plyometrics from the knees. The Achilles tendon. I mean, we feel the back of you. That Achilles tendon is massive. I mean, there's energy. There's so much energy can be stored in there, and we need to teach you how to do that. And if you can do that, it's not just power and propulsion that you get. It's economy of movement. It costs you less energy because it's free energy, right? So if you're stepping from a box or wherever, you're free falling in the air for whatever reason. Then you get to turn what is that potential energy, right, or gravitational energy. You can turn that into elastic energy and then into mechanical energy. So that's all come from that potential energy, as opposed to you landing, dissipating that energy and then using chemical energy to produce it, which is going to be your energy, your ATP, your glucose, and so on and so forth. That does make you tired. That does tax you. So if you can just make slight adjustments where a smaller a small improvement in the percentage of energy that you produce through gravitational energy, potential energy, ultimately elastic energy, you're going to feel that as well. You're going to feel that power propulsion. You're going to feel that in economy of movement. So start with the ankle. There's some good pogo exercises, low hurdles, and you can go into your drop jumps and so on. The world's your oyster from there, really. Again, it's just making sure you have the technique so that you can feel the effortlessness of the movement. You can see when someone lands and they go again, and what you don't see is their center of or their head, sort of sink, and their knees flex and
Mm.
their hips flex. They're just a stiff spring. So they land and then they're gone again. And it's you know when you've watched someone do it, and you could feel it, and it just takes time. I think you know, you see big improvements after, say, 3 months of plyometric training. But again, don't see that as a magic number. Just start incorporating a little bit of a slight peppering of plyometric training in your programming now. You go from none to some. And if it's 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, remember, this is a lifelong journey. It will make a huge, huge difference.
Yeah, for sure. And if you go too hard too fast, that Achilles will not be happy.
Achilles won't be happy. The tendon in your knees won't be happy. The muscles, nothing's going to be happy except for the physio. They love you. Love you. They love the cycle that you get caught in as well. the psychologist as well, because then you start beating yourself up, and then you start chasing the numbers back, because then you get injured and you come back, you don't want to start all over again, and you think, well, I was doing that before I got injured, let me do that now. Then you get injured again, and then it's just you're stuck in this cycle, really. There is no shortcut to this. If you don't do it progressively and you don't lay the foundations, if you don't see this as a long-term project, then you're in for a bit of a rough ride, really, unless you're really young, and then you
You can take anything.
you keep pulling from your pension, basically. That's all you're doing. You're drawing down immediately, and you get old. You're like, oh, I wish I hadn't done that. So take your time now and see an investment into the future version of yourself, the much older, greater version. And he's gonna thank you later for.
I have a question here from Jonathan again, but it's one we just answered at you around your thoughts on getting the cardio conditioning via methods other than jogging and running. He's thinking of an example of Franklin when he fought MMA, making use of circuit training with lighter weights for intense 30+ minute sessions. Actually, let's go into that one then, because it's slightly different on
Yeah,
circuit
that is
training
different.
with lighter weights for intense 30+ minute sessions.
So yeah, I don't mind so much that with lighter weights. So I kind of partition. I want to train all the time, right? Yeah, I don't want overtraining. Okay, and I don't want to overstress certain movements. So I'd probably partition them. So if I'm going to use weights, it's because I want to lift heavy and I want to lift fast. All right. Because let's say I do loads of circuit training using light weights or whatever it is, loads of squats. Let's say I do loads of squats as my conditioning exercise. That means I can't now for the next 2 days do any heavy squats because I've burnt it out. Right. Also, that I could put a certain stimulus in my legs that I could have done on a bike, or I could have done on a rower, and then I could train again the next day. In fact, I could train in the evening. It's about how savvy you are in terms of splitting up. And again, we work with athletes, and they're training 11 times a week, twice a day sessions, sometimes 3 times a day sessions. What you don't see is anyone doing weight-based circuit training or things like that that look like the thing that they need to do to get strong, or look like the thing they need to do to compete and train in. Where it looks like that thing, you're going to generate overtraining. So I'm not saying it doesn't work, and I'm saying as a more to improve the probability, and this is quite a nice way of thinking about things, is that there are no certainties, right? Everything's about probability. You have an understanding of something, and you hedge the bets in your favor. So I think that you could do that, and I think you could get away with it. But I think eventually you'd start to tire out, and you'd start to. But you might not want to question that, because I had some really good, cracking improvements off the back of it. You did, but now you're gonna pay the price for that. Whereas if you keep it separate, so my idea again, and I'll give you the reference to another book that I put together. Is basically what I'm going to try and plug at the end, is different conditioning. So I would do it on a bike, I would do it on a rower, I would do off feet conditioning where there's less load, and then you can train to your heart's content. It only takes 5-6 minutes to do this, and then go and train again in the afternoon if you want, or do that and then do some sparring in a fatigue state to train your cognitive capacity when you're tired. So, for example, if you wanted to train that capacity to how do you think when you're tired, and the technical or tactical side of that, don't spar yourself into that position, because it's a waste. You're not learning from it. You're just getting tired for the sake of getting tired. Tire yourself out on the bike, the rower, the battle ropes, then put yourself in that position, and now you've had the conditioning, plus you get the cognitive overload that comes with that. So partition it all out. Lift weights to get strong and powerful for no other reason. Don't do conditioning with it. Do your off-feet conditioning, do it fast, do it sharp, do hit, do sit. In 6 minutes, I'll give you the same adaptations. There's loads of research done on it. And again, I can put you out on it, that shows that 3 minutes on the bike with these certain stimuli is the same as a 45-minute, an hour run, or on the bike, 2 hours on the bike. It's not saying that 2 hours on the bike isn't bringing the stimulus. It's saying you can get the same thing for 5 minutes. But if you love cycling for 2 hours, then of course you should do that. Or if you want to get good at cycling, then what have you got to do? You've got to cycle. And we'll never beat that. We'll never beat that. But if you're cycling for an hour to be good in the ring for 3-minute rounds, I think that we might have a better solution for you, if again that's your only purpose for doing it.
I like that. It's actually a really good paper. I think it's that Sindre Molman. I probably said that name so wrong. That review of endurance training versus high intensity training versus sprint interval training, and just mentioned the exact same things you mentioned there
Yeah,
around the adaptations.
Professor Mike Gabala and those guys,
Mhm.
and David Bishop does it. I mean, incredible. Professor Stu Phillips, lots of cracking stuff in this area, and it's like that can't be true. I know. And then they have to repeat the same study, and they're doing muscle biopsies here. You know, people on
Yeah.
the bike are taking muscle out, grinding it down, looking in the lab to go, these are the changes we're seeing, cellular changes that we're seeing, and we repeated it, and they're like, and then when you add it up, you're like, oh, I get it. This is why.
Mhm.
When you go for a long run or long cycle, you create an energy deficit, right? And the body says, we need to we've got to be careful here. We need to start creating energy. And so you start to generate some of the adaptations around the mitochondria that we spoke about. If you do sprints, you also create an energy problem, all right? Just in a different way, but it's still a problem. And so the body still has to respond in the same way. And it's ingenious, really. But it's that deeper understanding. So that's probably where maybe I would have some other thoughts which aren't quite so intuitive. That would be like, actually, I would train like this. And I'll train. So I would say, as an example, someone come to train me, I think I would compartmentalize it. But I reckon over a 5 year, 3 year period, I reckon they'd complete more training sessions with me than training sessions with you. You might, for example, have far more success than me in the first 6 months because you've gone out. But I'd then own the next 2.5 years, 3 years, 4 years, and you're stuck in that cycle. As an example, I'm being obviously very crude, but hopefully you get that point that comes across.
No, but yeah, that we've done a lot because Dr. Andrew Usher and Dr. John Babra have been on the podcast quite a few times talking about their sprint interval training research, and Dr. John Babra's last 20 plus years of body sprint interval and high intensity training research. Yeah, it's interesting stuff for anyone who's interested. But Anthony, where can people find and follow you? Keep up with what you're doing. You've got a shit ton of resources out there, so plug which ones you want.
Yeah, so I'm on X and Instagram, which is Anthony Turner UK. So you can follow there. Obviously on ResearchGate, you can grab the papers uh, uh, as well. And then I'll start to put more resources together. I'll put together like a website that's linked to a book. Can I show you the book?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, of course.
So it's that I finished that book that coming up,
Very nice.
and
The
it's
fitness formula for anyone who's just listening.
this is it, the fitness formula. It goes for everything we just said, and it will go through the plyometrics. And there's a link to the website, the accompanying website, which is the fitness formula training.
Mhm.
And there you'll get the resources. So I've started to put all the papers that I talk about and everything I've just said there, that squat loop, the
Mhm.
plyometrics loop, the sit training, the interval training. So the idea behind it is I've tried to get a lot of academic research that I've been involved in, my colleagues have been involved in, and try to write it into more more usable text that's about a journey that you go on, and it has a training program at the end. And I think I said to you, so if you look at my training programs, it's typically along the lines of strength, power, plyo, hamstrings. That's like the core of it for the lower body. And then you might have a rehab and a conditioning at the end. And then it has an upper body version, which is the push, pull, vertical, horizontal, and the rotation core and ISO on the other side. As long as so imagine they're the boxes, and there are certain exercises that go within that box, right? And just imagine each one's like a goal. As long as you shoot within that goal, it doesn't matter where it goes, you score. It doesn't matter what you do. We overthink it. But if you did want to follow a certain um, um, route, you could do this. You could go squats, blah 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 blah. You could do this, blah 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 blah, and so on. Really. So it's sort of everything that we've gone through now, and then it sort of culminates. Therefore, this is how you should train.
Awesome. And Jonathan says thank you on the book. He'll definitely read it. So you've sold one already
Oh man,
on the
I'm
live
grateful. There
podcast.
you go. Thank you very much. Right,
That's some pennies towards the new Porsche.
Yeah,
perfect.
that's it. That's it. Now, that's it. So I might be trading in for a Lambo at
There we
this
go.
age. There we go. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, I appreciate you coming on, Anthony, and sharing everything. I'll link all those up in the comments of the podcast. So on the description of the podcast on YouTube and Spotify, or wherever you're listening. So you can check those down below. And I appreciate it. Thanks for coming on.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me, James. Really delighted with that.